Welcome to our last session of Voices of GIS. Thank you all so much for being a part of this semester. I really enjoyed it, and I'm hoping to continue it next year. So one of the things, some of the feedback I've gotten is just that this should be opened up to more people. And so we're going to try to turn it into sort of a geography, College of Forestry wide thing that happens occasionally through the semester. So we'll see how that goes. I am so pleased to introduce Arin Leopold, who is from Onyx. He's a geospatial business intelligence analyst. He'll be able to tell us what that means. From Onyx, he graduated with his master's from here in GIS and Cartography in 22. And his work really focused while he was here on disability in rural communities. Arin, actually I didn't realize this, but he actually came here and was working for the Rural Institute during his master's degree as well. And then after graduating, transitioned to working for Onyx, where he's been ever since. Much of Arin's day-to-day, and we'll get into some of this, is actually doing GIS in Python and SQL and using a lot of other open source tools, some of which you've heard of from me, Leaflet being a good web mapping framework, those sorts of things, but also Apache Airflow, which is a workflow system, and graph databases through GraphQL. So without further ado, help me welcome Arin, and we'll get started. So as you know, everybody here has submitted questions for this interview today. So we're going to talk for about 40 minutes, and then I'll open it up for questions from y'all. But we like to start by just hearing a little bit more about your preparation, your education. One thing that wasn't in your bio is where you went to undergrad and what it was in. So let's start there.
Yeah, I finished my undergrad in 2018. I went to Iowa State University and got a degree in environmental science. After that, I moved into genetics, I guess. I was at DuPont, Pioneer, Dow, those devilish companies. It was terrible. I did not like it. And was kind of at that point of I had taken GIS in college. I don't know. I saw it as a tangible skill to latch onto to pivot my career at that point. A lot of people go to grad school now, I feel to kind of pivot their career. It's I have no experience in this field, so I just want to dive in and make the most of it. So that's kind of what I did by coming here for geography, and yeah, worked at the Rural Institute. Worked at the Rural Institute after my master's, and then started at Onyx. But yeah, I don't know. One first bit of advice is getting a master's isn't a gimme for getting a job. If you think it'll open up jobs, it will if you work hard, but it won't if you don't. I know a lot of people that finish their masters and were well, can't find a job, I guess I'll do my PhD and just keep it rolling. And I don't know. I think you need to know what you want to get out of it if you're going to do it, or at least know what you don't want to get out of it. Something along those lines. Just don't go into something without a goal. But anyway,
tell us a little bit more about your disability research with the Rural Institute and with your master's thesis. How did that connect tangibly to GIS?
Yeah, it was just research, assistant work at first, managing their database and aggregating disability rates, census data, American Community Survey data to the county level and state level. My thesis was on the social determinants of health and how the implications of those on disability employment rates, which is often used as a proxy for quality of life for those with disabilities. And so I was doing that work at the Rural Institute. After getting my master's, I switched to doing spatial modeling, actual spatial modeling, not a GWR, but I think I wrote a paper on internet access for those with disabilities using a spatial error model, which was hard, and I learned a lot. Yeah.
Did you come from a rural background? What got you in? How did you connect to the Rural Institute?
No, that was picking grad school, where I wanted to go to school was, I'm just going to apply to all these schools, apply to any research RA-ships they have, TA-ships they have. I applied to this RA-ship at the Rural Institute, and they offered me a position. Before I accepted like coming here for grad school, and then kind of just made sense they would help pay for school. I could do my thesis with them. I could, turns out, get a job with them afterwards. So it's just like a nice comfort thing.
Yeah. How did you find the Rural Institute? I mean, many students here are probably thinking about going to grad school, or how did you start that search and land on Montana?
You do a lot of creeping on the internet of like researching geography departments and looking at the faculty and then clicking on all of the hyperlinks that each faculty member has, and then going deeper down the hyperlinks that those hyperlinks have, and keep doing that until eventually you get to like a job board that hasn't been updated since the early 2000s, and then you apply.
Got it.
Yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good. So you were here for your master's. You were doing this disability research. What motivated your pivot after you were done with your master's to working at Onyx? Like, how did that transition happen?
Yeah, I don't know. It's kind of, I mean, if you guys want to stay in Missoula, you want to buy a house in Missoula, you'll quickly learn being a research associate at a poorly funded research institute is not the way to do that. So I was applying for other jobs that sounded interesting. I wanted to do spatial analytics, and Onyx had a posting. They had two postings, one for cartography and one for analytics. I applied for the analytics one and went through 6 interviews and was offered it, and it was like double my salary. So that was a pretty easy decision at the time. Especially I was working on grant funding, which is not the most reliable thing. And when you want to have a sense of security, being grant funded can be really stressful, especially if you're not the one actively working on the grants, which when you're in a research institute, often they're kind of done together, like with a bunch of other people. And yeah, I don't know. I didn't really love that.
Yeah, it's sort of a contingent lifestyle.
Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, it can be stressful. I had a coworker at the Rural Institute who, her salary was $60K plus or minus $20K depending on the grant cycle, which like that much range in a salary is it's really stressful, especially if you have a mortgage.
In your bio, you really emphasize some of the open source tools that you use, and I was wondering if you could tell us a little bit about what the ecosystem was like at the Rural Institute versus when you moved to Onyx in terms of utilizing open source GIS, and then whether, how you went about learning some of the skills that are necessary, programming, SQL, you name it.
Yeah, my claim to fame at the Rural Institute was I brought Arc Pro to the Rural Institute, which is terrible. And then I did a bunch of dashboarding for them in Arc because that's what the university is plugged into. So that was that. As I was going through the interviews at Onyx, we used Google BigQuery quite a bit, which is a cloud. It's called like a data lake, data warehouse, but it's all our data stored in the cloud, and it's a GUI similar to Earth Engine if you're familiar with that, but it's not Java. It's SQL, and you can interact with data that way. I didn't know SQL when I was going through the interview process. I didn't know Python. I knew a little bit of R through a spatial analysis class, but on my resume I might have said I knew both. And so when I got a take-home test that was write a SQL script to join all these tables together and do a spatial analysis, did a lot of Googling, and then realized that it was pretty cool. And whether or not I got the job, I cared, but I wasn't that invested because I had a job. So I started using Google BigQuery at the Rural Institute because I just been learning it for this interview, and it was really neat because we were able to bring data into a database that wasn't just Excel files stored on the C drive or whatever, but actually I don't know, you could just query it immediately in the cloud with all of the resources you wanted and do spatial operations in a way that you couldn't do on your computer. So that was how I got into SQL, and then I knew R and kind of lied and said I knew Python. It sounds like I quit my job for money and then lied on my interview. But there's more to it than that. Because I didn't know Python all that well, but I knew how to learn code because I've been going through this R course, and looking back at the coding languages I know now, R is definitely the least intuitive to me now. A lot of Python or a lot of coding languages are object-based just-in-time processing, like R is, but everything's defined backwards in R when you kind of look at it. So knowing the hard language first helped, I think, or the hard language for me. And then when you work in a private industry with, or I guess probably any industry where you work alongside people whose whole job it is to write software in a language, Python, or data engineers that write in Python, it's a lot easier to learn Python because you're not a silo on your own, but you have like code examples in front of you and people to ask and people to Slack to like get your code to run and like how to do things. Yeah, and then about a month after starting at Onyx, we had a director join, and his first initiative was to cancel any Esri license we still had. I think we had 3, which was like to deal with geodatabases because they're so hard to deal with data-wise. They don't make any sense unless you're paying for their software. So that kind of forced everybody on our team to pivot to QGIS full-time, which is a lot of what we still use. But we built a graph database, old transportation data, and that has its own IDE. It's a little different. Yeah, trial by fire, and it didn't have any like formal training in coding other than a spatial analyses class in R. But like I'm sure you guys have learned if you've taken a coding course, Stack Exchange and Google are really great, and like learning how to Google your problem and copy and paste your error message into Google is so powerful, and like not everybody knows how to do that. And like sometimes you have to teach people how to look up their questions. And so like just learning those skills is pretty cool.
Do you use ChatGPT at all for those sort of things now?
So there's a thing that manages code in a lot of software companies called GitHub, if you're familiar with GitHub. In GitHub, in a controlled environment, you have to do what's called a pull request, where you like, I'm making a change to the code base, I need somebody else to review my change, make sure it doesn't break, and then I'll merge it into the master branch or whatever. I lost access to ChatGPT because I was using it to write poems for my colleagues to put on their pull requests whenever I would review their codes. And Onyx didn't like that. So no, I don't use ChatGPT anymore. Yeah, I tried like the plug-in thing for VS Code for a while, but it was just kind of steering me in the wrong directions.
Yeah.
And it was giving me a lot of poetry because my account was like asking me for
All
write
poetry.
I would like write a rap in the style of Biggie Smalls about how Jonathan did a good job writing this joint.
Oh. I mean, I feel like that's a pretty good use of ChatGPT.
I think so. Gemini's not as, we have access to Google Gemini, and
Yeah.
it doesn't do as good of a job
No.
for that sort of thing.
No.
But I have access to it, so
Maybe it'll learn from you.
hope so.
Well, I want to transition a little bit to Onyx and the work that you've done around land access, and just, you know, this is a company that we're pretty proud of that is based out of Missoula and that a lot of us use. I don't know, can I have a raise of hands of people who have a subscription or use it? It's like about half the class people on video. Where to start? So one of the things that we were talking about, or that students were asking about, had to do with the research you shared, which was a white paper on public land, private land public access, right? And what that did was sort of highlight the distribution of public versus private land across the contiguous U.S., across the West primarily, and access problems that occur when you've got either landlocked public land or corner-locked public land. One of the things that we were talking about, that we've talked about a lot in this class, has to do with access to public data or authoritative data on land. Can you walk us through where Onyx gets a lot of its land access data and this sort of challenge of organizing those data at a nationwide scale, the way that Onyx does?
Yeah, that is a good question. We get it from literally everywhere that you can get data. We have people scrape PDFs. If there's some state park that only has a PDF map of it, we'll like digitize that in and have that data. If the cadastral has public lands data, we'll use that. Forest Service often has public data in some sort of geospatial form. Same with BLM or MVUM. So we use all of that. I think Hunt alone has over 500 data sources that exist for Hunt outside of the other apps. I think there are something like 1,200 data sources total that feed into our lands data. It's also kind of interesting because we have, with public data, that, you know, the opposite of that is private data. Or what's the question about public data or public land data?
Well, it's about land data in general, but the different sources that you get it from.
Yeah, okay. So we have private land data that is public and private land data that is private that we pay for. With a good comprehensive private land data set, we can difference, you know, like the country to that to get anything, like anything that remains is probably public. So we can kind of build some data in that sense if we don't have it. The process, though, for trying to figure out how much public land there is in the US is pretty difficult. Like, you can't just run like ST area on a layer and have it spit out a number at the end that tells you how much area of public land there is. Yeah, more than that, like, questions of access are pretty interesting when you start to consider private land might have a public road that goes through it, or private land might have a stream that goes through it, and if you're below the high water mark on this stream, then you're on public land. And that's state by state. You have to consider those ways of access to determine access. To run that on a nationwide level isn't actually something we've achieved yet. We have a process in place. We've done it for Montana, and we've done sort of broad analyses like that paper I shared that are across the US, but they're not that nuanced in how they quantify or qualify rather access. It's really hard. We kind of have to do it state by state, and more than that, we might have to do it county by county because not all counties will have the same quality of data. Yeah.
I imagine if it's hard to organize all this data and display them, it's doubly hard to keep them updated.
Yeah, I saw that. Yeah.
Yeah, how does that work? I mean,
Yeah, we have a whole team called data operations,
Yeah.
and their goal is to update every county once per year. That is a hard goal. They specifically on private land, that's kind of like, when we survey our users, that's what users care the most about, is private land. So we want to update that as much as we can. We try to update state and federal data as much as possible, but a lot of those federal sources and state sources don't update that on that cadence. We scrape a lot of web services and REST APIs to, basically if there's an update, it'll run through some processes and we'll validate it. We'll have some checks against it to make sure, like, I don't know, maybe we'll validate the area of a geography we get and make sure that it's not 0 or something like that. If it isn't 0 or whatever, then we'll just like pipe it in immediately, but we'll set up a lot of automated systems in that sense. There are counties though, like in Georgia, where their data is written down and you have to go to the county clerk's office and digitize those by hand, and we pay a service who pays people to do that. We don't do that.
you know, you're illustrating how different things are across the nation. And in a state like Montana, we've got a pretty good geospatial infrastructure in terms of our cadastral. We've got ownership data that's fairly well organized and fairly well updated and very accessible. So like I could go and look up who owns any parcel in the state right now.
Yeah.
You don't have that in other states.
No.
And some landowners might be surprised that that information is generally public data, a matter of public record. Do you get pushback? I mean, and this may not be what you do, but does Onyx get pushback with the fact that they've made these public records of ownership so accessible?
Not really. I mean, like a phone book is kind of the same thing. It's an
Sure.
address and a name. There have been cases though where like some counties have law. There's a cool name for this law. I don't remember what it is, but like a judge's, maybe like a public judge or public defender's address might need to be hidden for obvious reasons, I guess. And they're having cases of us publishing their address in our app when it's not published elsewhere. And that's usually in a case where we're paying our provider for that data, and I don't know how they got it. To be honest, like, I don't know. And so yeah, we've gotten contacted by a certain sheriff's office to like take that out, and we do a pretty good job of responding to errors, just in general. So that's pretty easy for us to do. There hasn't been like a strong pushback though of just like get my address out of there. I think a lot of people understand that that data is public. Yeah, people are more concerned about being tracked than they are their data.
Oh,
being
like users being tracked.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, we get a lot more pushback and people hating on us in forums about that than we do about just data availability.
And I haven't used the Hunt app, so I don't know if this is actually a feature right now, but you could imagine that tracking could be really useful, like give you a little alert. Oh, you may be crossing into unallowed, a place you shouldn't be.
Yeah.
Does that feature exist, and how have you all dealt with that sort of tracking sensitivity?
We anonymize it. We haven't really dealt with it other than that. Like you can click tracking and it'll be like Strava and it'll tell you how far you've gone and how fast you've gone and how much time. That's a user's choice. We don't track them. We don't take hidden data, I guess is what I'm trying to say. It's funny though, because we serve our apps on Mapbox and they do. So, but we don't access that. Mapbox does. It's their data, not ours.
Oh.
Yeah, it's a weird thing.
Yeah. Getting into the private land public access report, you told me earlier that there's actually been a couple more versions of that report.
Yeah, I shared the
since
wrong one. Sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. What sort of changes have happened in the more recent versions, and what sort of reaction has Onyx gotten to that report?
Yeah, it's gotten to be a lot more robust, and kind of what I was speaking to earlier about like defining access on a state-by-state basis of public roads through private land and that sort of thing, which that first paper was kind of naive of. We've also done a lot on cornered locked parcels and understanding that. There's been some interesting lawsuits around that Onyx is kind of on the sidelines of, I guess. Just I think the user in that lawsuit was using our app. And we kind of have a stake in corner crossing being allowed. It just makes our lives a little easier. Yeah, so kind of the biggest change to that analysis has just been a more robust understanding of what access is.
Yeah. Have you been following? So the version that you did share with us talked about the upcoming 2023 Farm Bill, which, if you haven't been following this, we still don't have a Farm Bill. We're on a continuing resolution for a year, and supposedly we'll get a draft of a Farm Bill around Memorial Day. We'll see. But do you know sort of how the access issues that were in the last Farm Bill, do you know anything about how that's shaping up? Have you been tracking this?
Nope.
Okay, that was an unfair question to ask you.
There's one other question in there that I do not know the answer to.
That you don't know the answer to? Okay, well, we may get to it.
I don't know where land trusts and conservation easements fit into.
I did not ask that question because I thought that maybe would be.
But I was going to try to get you that answer.
Yeah, that's sort of interesting. So this was a question that Jocelyn asked. She's right. But how did land trusts and conservation easements fit into public access programs?
No idea.
And I don't know that either. But here's a different question though. Pivoting. Georgia asked how machine learning and AI are involved in your work, and we already got into the fact that you're not allowed to use it for writing your poetry and get.
Well, large language models. That
Yes,
is.
yes, yeah, sure. But other forms of machine learning and AI, I'm sure, are used.
Yeah, I'm curious what your guys' perception of machine learning is. Like, I don't know. One thing geography taught me is that like any sort of unsupervised or supervised image classification you're doing in ARC or whatever software is machine learning, which you need to recognize that and put that on your resume because that is a buzzword that people will pick up on. Like, you've done machine learning. Machine learning is not just large language models.
Right.
And yeah, so there's that. We do a lot of machine learning with predictive modeling and trying to understand our users, what drives our users to do certain business things like pay us money.
Mm-hmm.
And I've recently been working on like user personas based on behavior data, which uses clustering algorithms. It's all unsupervised learning.
Just define for everybody what do you mean by user persona?
Yeah, typically in a business sense, it's like the white middle-aged man with the income between 60 and 100K will likely spend this much money in a year, and they're driven by Father's Day sales. Like, and that's like, so there's a causal relationship there of like what drives them to spend money, and that's Father's Day sales. That sort of causal inferencing is pretty important to business understandings. It's also really hard to get at, and it requires a lot of machine learning, or at least Bayesian statistics. So making these persona like that isn't really possible for us because we don't have demographic data, but we do have behavior data. We know what, like if a user is downloading offline maps, placing waypoints, interacting with certain features versus other features, and we can discern whether or not a hunter is a stalker or a sitter, whether they're a Midwest hunter that sits in a tree stand, or if they're in the West and they're stalking their hunt. We do this with off-road, we do this in various different ways, but we're able to discern like level of engagement and type of engagement, and we can create personas around that, and those personas how to tell us what drives a person to spend money. Yeah.
Just in case people here didn't explore all of the different apps that Onyx has, what are your current offerings? How do they differ?
Oh God.
Yeah, no, sorry.
They're all the same.
They're all the same.
It's all
Okay,
the same
great.
data.
Yeah.
Hunt and off-road are very similar. There's hunt, off-road, backcountry, and fish. Fish is just in Minnesota. Backcountry, I think, is pretty cool. It has a lot of neat things around like slope aspect and avalanche risk with the AIDS model, snow imagery, that sort of thing. Off-road is transportation focused and kind of presents transportation data more, and hunt presents parcel data more. It's all the same data.
It's all the same.
Mm-hmm.
What's next for Onyx? Like, what can we look forward to?
Hopefully not Meta buying us or something like that. I don't know. Fishing seems like a big thing. We just acquired a Trout Routes is an app that has stream fishing, so that's our next value prospect, I guess. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so we want to pivot to some of your advice, because one of the things that characterizes this course is that everybody's coming at it at GIS from different perspectives, from different backgrounds, and are at different points in their educational career. But one through line that everybody wants to know is what do you view as essential skills, GIS or otherwise, for those interested in careers with companies like Onyx or just generally in geospatial fields?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things. Like, we give Esri and ArcMap and ArcPro a lot of shit, but like, if you learn those, you're learning the basic spatial operations that exist throughout all of the software. So just because you don't know QGIS or you don't know GeoPandas or whatever, doesn't mean you don't know how things work spatially. And it is really simple as like knowing what a buffer is, or knowing how to clip something to a bounding box, or looking for, I don't know, maybe looking for all of the points of interest along a road using STD within, so distance within. Just understanding that is more important than any given software, because there are thousands of tools out there that allow you to do the same thing, just in a different interface. ArcMap, ArcPro is probably the slowest spatial software I've used, which sucks for you guys. But like, if you learn how to do big spatial processes in it, you've just sort of problem solved something that is applicable to problem solving in the future. Like, I think an interesting challenge to do is try to do a spatial operation on your local computer that breaks Arc. Like, try to find one that breaks it, and then try to get it to run on your computer using other means. An example of this might be like, identify all of the counties that have this certain land cover in it. Like, you probably can't run that on a nationwide data set in Arc, but maybe you can get a list of all the counties and put that into Python and then loop through every county. So for each county in this county list, run the spatial operation and append it to a data frame. And that's pretty powerful. It's powerful for you to be able to do more on your local machine, but then if you move to a company where they have cloud infrastructure, that just unlocks like so much. It's crazy, yeah. Yeah, and I guess with that, like, the most annoying advice anybody can give you is learn to code, because nobody wants to learn to code. Learning to code sucks. It's so hard. And it's all so different, and then you learn that like Python isn't even considered a real coding language. It's a pseudo language. It's built on coding languages, just to push you back down again. But that said, there's a lot you can do with it, and there's a lot of like unique ways to join libraries together to solve novel problems in it. And it's really hard to also learn how to code when you don't have a task to do. But when you work at a company and they're like, do this thing, or you don't have a job, then you learn how to do it, and it's, you have a goal that you're working towards. That makes it a lot easier. And I don't know, it's no fun to like follow along on a YouTube tutorial. But like anything you've done in this course, whether it's building a core pleth map or doing a spatial join or something like that, you could easily do in Python. And I don't know, just start by like Googling like how to do a spatial join in Python, and then you'll get a bunch of libraries, and it'll force you to learn how to install Python on a machine and how to open in an IDE like VS Code or Sublime or something, and then start working with it. If you guys haven't used notebooks, Python notebooks, those are really awesome. Jupyter Labs, Jupyter Notebooks. They make learning Python a lot easier because it's not just you run code and it fails immediately, but you can run it one block at a time so you know where it fails. And then I guess more specific coding advice is learn how to do logging, learn how to put statements in your code so if it fails, it'll print off why it failed or where it failed. Because most of our job is like troubleshooting code and trying to get it to run. Kyle was telling me you guys were learning Model Builder. That's pretty cool. Learning like pipelines, how to do spatial operations on a data set in a certain order is pretty powerful. And it kind of helps break up those impossible tasks.
Because that's the sort of thing you have to do when you're coding.
Yeah, totally.
I mean, that's what it is.
Yeah.
What was the most useful class or internship or experience that you had while here for your career? Like, what was the most useful thing that happened at ULA?
It's probably a course that's not offered. It was just called Spatial Analyses. Jeremy
Yeah.
Sage taught it.
Oh, okay.
But it was all in R, and it was all spatial modeling, which is like doing a y equals mx plus b model, but then adding a spatial matrices in it and trying to figure out like, the spatial influences of data for given relationships. That was awesome because it forced me to learn R, and then I learned about like spatial data and modeling with it.
There's a course that's similar to that that some of you are taking right now, environmental analytics by why am I Fernando Sanchez. I forget his hyphenated last name, but so if you're interested in that, that's the course to take right now. Really good to do some similar things.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I don't know. I think this is pretty interesting. Like, it's cool to, I was telling Kyle earlier, it's cool to have people that aren't in academia talk to you about like careers and give job advice, because it's kind of a bummer when you're surrounded by people who made their whole career in academia. You ask them for your job advice and they tell you to get a PhD. Nobody wants to do that. Yeah, I guess I don't know, kind of back to job advice, but like put as many buzzwords as you can on your resume. If you're applying to anything through USA Jobs, have a USA Jobs resume full of buzzwords, and it'll scan it for buzzwords. And you'll move past that gate and then have a different resume that's your actual resume that you want to give to the hiring manager. And you can be explicit about that. They've all played that game. They know what it's like.
To get through that. Yeah.
Yeah. And like, don't be afraid to reach out to people on LinkedIn and like cold call people. It's kind of intimidating, but I don't know. I've known lots of folks to get jobs that way. Just being aggressive and tenacious and showing up for an interview and asking engaging questions and relating it to the work you've done. And don't be afraid to say you don't know something. Be humble.
Do you hire people at Onyx?
Yes.
And on the hiring side,
Yeah.
what do you think Onyx is looking for when it's hiring somebody in the geospatial positions?
Yeah, my team. I'm on a team of 2, so it's kind of weird. But we look for anybody with SQL experience, structured query language, or Python, or R. We don't really. I don't know. Like QGIS or ArcMap is not bad to have for our team, but we just run so many big spatial operations that we need people to understand how to do big data processes. An example of that is like a couple months ago I was asked to, if you guys heard of OpenStreetMap?
Mm-hmm.
It's a public data source. We weren't using OpenStreetMap for our transportation data, we had our own data. But we were on the precipice of this, a lot of tech companies are moving to using OpenStreetMap. OpenStreetMap has a clause, if you use and edit their data, you are required to publish it. So it takes a competitive edge off of us to be like, if we use OpenStreetMap, that means we have to give some of our secrets to the world. Things like specific off-roading in the woods or whatnot that other companies might not have. So we were faced with this question of like, do we want to do that, or should we stick to our guns and keep with our own data? And so I had to run an analysis on our transportation layer against all of OSM, which was 30 million features in OSM compared to our 30 million features, thousands of miles of trails across the country. It's like, where do you begin to do that? And it takes a lot of Python and for loops and incremental processing, recursive processing, to do an analysis like that. And you can't just like plug it into Arc and just say, give me the answer.
Right. There's no one tool.
No.
It's just going to do that. Yeah.
No, it's a lot of code.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, we look for problem solving more than anything, just like an interest in problem solving. And yeah, a foundation in Python and SQL is great, but seeing kind of just like a thoughtful mind of being problem solving, not being overly confident, and I don't know. If this job has taught me one thing, it's like I know absolutely nothing, and I will continue to know nothing as much as I think I know. I don't know anything. It's yep.
You also work with you said you have a team of 2.
Yeah.
But how many people does Onyx employ?
We're near 400. I think it's crazy. We have like 100
Yeah.
managers, which is just silly.
Mm.
It's such a terrible ratio.
And how many people are in Missoula?
Oh, there are like 5 of us that show up at the office. Probably like 20 of us in Missoula, 30 of us in Missoula.
Uh-huh.
My whole team's in Missoula, all 2 of us. So that's cool.
So that's nice that your whole team's in Missoula, but what's it been like working in such a distributed company?
Well, it's pretty low. Our work is pretty low stakes. If we make a mistake, somebody doesn't get a feature in an app, or it's a private business that's for recreation. So that takes the edge off a little bit, knowing that. But like working across the country, the director of the geospatial department is in Vermont, and it's honestly fine. Like you don't notice it. Everybody respects working hours, and it's chill. Like people will take the middle of the day off and work in the afternoons and kind of flex their time.
It's interesting that you consider your job low stakes, because I think of like if somebody goes onto private property that the app tells them is accessible, but it isn't, they could get shot. Or if their avalanche, the avalanche
data,
risk, that's like
Serious.
serious.
But like compared to the Rural Institute, where it was disability research, and we were kind of like advocates for this a sensitive group.
Mm-hmm.
I always thought that was more high stakes.
I
It
see
would
what you mean,
influence
yeah.
my dreams
Yeah.
at night, and Onyx doesn't really encroach into my dream space.
Got it. Well, what sort of questions do y'all have for Arin? I know I didn't get to all of the questions that you submitted. Jack.
So I'm curious, so you all work out of one big database, is that correct?
No, we have so many databases right now. Well, not really. We have like 4 databases. our main geospatial data for lands data, parcel data, polygons mostly, endpoints, is all in a Postgres database that uses PostGIS database that uses Postgres SQL, and that is what it is. We just moved all of our transportation data into a graph-based database, which is graph. We have a Postgres replica of graph data because you can't actually query graph data all that well. Graph data structures are weirdly interesting. It's a bummer. It's like you feel like a grandfather talking about your model train collection when you talk about database structures. But graph-based databases are neat because they all work in like points and lines, nodes and ways, and all of our transportation data is in it, and we built that to solve what my colleague coined the spaghetti problem, where we would show a hiking trail and a road and a rich content trail, a trail that's like a guided trail with photos and stuff. We'd show that all as 3 separate lines on the map, and it would just create like a spaghetti of geometries that when it's just one road.
Mm-hmm.
So we built this graph database to kind of solve the spaghetti problem. So that's 2. We then shove a ton of data into Google BigQuery, and that pulls from Google Buckets. So this Google is 3. Then we have a database called mParticle, which all of our events, so when you are on your phone, you like tap on the map, a payload is created, a JSON.json is created, and those are catched, and then they all send up to our router, which then goes into mParticle. So that's the 3, and then
That
we
was
send,
4.
That's 4, and then we send another. We have more data that we send to this database called Braze, which is a big marketing database for them to send. It's like for email campaigns. So like if you want to email hunters or something, then you might create a cohort, send that to Braze, and send that on. We then have something called the Supergraph, which has something in it called the Knowledge Graph, which then has something in that, or 12 somethings in that called subgraphs. And those are used for like favoriting services and recommendation services. It's all kind of crazy and disparate. Yeah.
Do you know off the top of your head how many users you have right now?
At one point, I was like 1% of the country. It was kind of crazy. It was
that's
like
big.
3 million? Something like that. It was almost 1%.
3.5 million?
Yeah, it was like 3.2.
Huh.
I don't know if they're all active.
Yeah,
but
sure.
At one point or another. Yeah. And that was across all apps. Yeah. Yeah.
You mentioned the snow imagery for the avalanche, or the backcountry.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know you guys did live imagery. Is it live imagery? Could you just touch on that? And like, do you have users like wanting, like real time, like imagery for not only backcountry but for hunt, fish, whatever?
Yeah, that's a cool question. The snow imagery is kind of interesting because if you've ever tried to work with imagery in the winter, it's a lot of cloud cover, and so you have to like mosaic a bunch of data sets together of when there aren't clouds for this given area. So the snow imagery that we display is like 5 or 6 years worth of imagery, all kind of mosaic together. It's really annoying to work with because you click on one pixel and it gives you 1 year and 1 date. And you click on a pixel next to it and it's another year and another date. It's weird. But like as far as live imagery goes, we call that high frequency imagery. And Hunt has it where we get deliveries from Planet every 2 weeks of the whole country, and I think Canada, parts of Canada, northern Canada is always cloudy, so it's kind of useless there. But and so we serve that in the app. There's like a time slider, and you can slide back through time. It's kind of neat for, seeing if your perennial stream is there or not. But it's not high resolution. I think it's zoom level 15, so like cars on the street, not quite shingles on the roof kind of clarity. Yeah, that answered your question. I was telling Kyle, it's kind of a bummer, but like all of the imagery we have is 3-band, just RGB. We don't get any other bands because why would we? We just serve it in an app as a picture. So we can't actually do a lot of raster analyses on it for cool things. But yeah, we're...
Unless somebody else does.
Aiden right behind you has been trying to get his hand up. And then I'll
sorry.
That's
No,
fine.
it's all good.
I wanted to hear a little bit more about the sort of internal structure of Onyx. Like I looked at their careers page and they have sort of a geospatial category and a engineering category, and those are distinct, but it sounds like you are a geospatial person that has a lot of insight into the engineering. Is it all sort of the same under the hood once you're inside, or
Yeah,
Do you
no.
have different people in different?
No, there's a lot of we have like departments, right? And each department has its own engineering team, I think.
Mhm.
So we have a geospatial engineering team, and we also like cartography cartography hires like geospatial engineers specifically. But it's less romantic than you would think. It's less map design and art. It's more like how to get tiles of data up into the app as fast as possible. Yeah, that's about it. I mean, like, there's a geospatial department, and that's divided into two categories, engineering and not. And I'm on the not side of that. And then there are like 4 other departments that deal with various things that I don't really work with.
Right on.
So you were talking a lot about like essentially admitting, like in the hiring process and in an actual job environment, admitting when you don't know how to do something. How much patience do you feel you're given when, you know, a need comes through and you don't know how to do it? Like, how much time do you feel like you get actually
Man,
to
that
figure
is
it
like
out?
every day. It is incredible. I've been at Onyx for 2 years, and it's just like, someday I would like a problem I've done before. That'd be nice. I feel like we're given a lot of grace as far as that's concerned, and there is always an urgency to things. But again, you have a lot of support. Like, there's colleagues everywhere, and if you don't know something, you just ask. And yeah, admitting what you don't know. We just hired an engineer. I was on a team of 5, and 3 of them left to be engineers. Now it's just 2 of them. But we hired one of those engineers. We were asking him a question about it's called quad tree, a way of doing recursive analyses. And he had done it. He just didn't know it was called quad tree. And we were asking him about it. And he's just like, I'm not gonna bullshit you guys. I don't know what you're talking about. And we hired him because we're like, yeah, he gets it. It was cool. Like, I don't know. We don't want a bullshit answer. We just want somebody that will be real. I think a willingness to learn is super important, and nobody, I don't know, the people that stick around aren't necessarily lazy. They kind of get after it and try their best, and sometimes that's not always the best way to do something, but if it works, great, and if you learn from it, that's even better. Yeah, it's a pretty positive environment as far as that goes. Hopefully other jobs are too.
Nick had a question.
What sorts of lobbying does Onyx do, and how does that influence public policy?
Lobbying? Not enough. I don't know. I feel like we don't take a stance on anything. Not really. Not in any meaningful way. We lobby for land access, which is great, and we lobby. Well, political lobbying, not really any. But like, you know, Onyx propaganda lobbying, sure. And we do a lot for land access and public land access, and we do a lot of like stream cleanups and that sort of thing, land cleanup. Quite a bit. As far as like politics go, they purposefully don't take a stance on anything. They just don't want to be divisive and lose part of their client base. It's kind of a bummer at times, but also I get it, and like I don't necessarily want to stir the pot at work. That's like not the place that where I want my pot stirred. Yeah.
Jack had a question, and then we gotta wrap it up.
So when you were kind of talking about your master's program, you said that it was a pretty sharp turn in terms of like fields. Could you just go over like maybe some challenges of learning something new at that level?
Yeah, it was hard. I thought it was hard. I think everything's hard though. I don't know. I never really like considered myself smart. I just feel like I've worked hard, and that's kind of what I stand by. But I don't know. The biggest challenge for me was just like the imposter syndrome you get when you do anything is so real. Of just like, I've never touched this before, and you're asking me to do it. Turns out you can do it, and there's like kind of unlocks this thing in your mind of like every time you meet somebody, a specialist in anything, kind of discredits them. You're like, you don't know what you're doing. Nobody knows what they're doing. But there's comfort in that, and that's kind of cool. It also makes you not trust people to come repair your house when it breaks. I think the biggest challenge for me was like switching into the academic brain of like, there's so much, you get so many bullshit questions in academia, like, how does your work fit in with this body of literature? Or like, where do you see this work fitting in the body of literature that you're developing? No offense.
No.
But, and that's pretty exhausting because it's, I mean, there's rigor in it, which is cool to learn and important to learn, because it teaches you that you need to have a reason for doing what you're doing. And it forces you to be logical about things and forces you to take time to think through why you're doing something and how you're doing something. And it turns out that's kind of more important than the result. Like, if you do something and the result is wrong or inaccurate or misleading, as long as you can justify every step that you took to get there, then people don't hate you for it. Like, they can understand that. It's a pretty human thing. And often, if you can justify each step, you take the time to do each thing as best as you can, you often end up with a pretty good result.
That's great. Thank you so much for being here today, Arin. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah.